The contract found me the way most bad decisions do, quietly, through a contact who would not meet my eyes when he slid it across the table. Saturation diving, long rotations, extreme depth, hazard pay that bordered on absurd. I had worked deep before. Not this deep, but deep enough to know the numbers mattered less than what lived between them. The paperwork described routine subsea maintenance on aging infrastructure, power relays, fiber lines, things that did not care whether a human body was attached to the tools fixing them. The risk assessment was sterile, full of tidy charts and approved margins. According to the documents, everything dangerous had already been accounted for. That alone should have worried me. During orientation, they rushed us. Not in the way companies rush to save time, but in the way people rush when they do not want questions. Safety briefings were delivered in a flat voice, slides advancing before anyone could finish reading them. Standard procedures were emphasized. Decompression schedules, redundancies, emergency protocols, all familiar, all safe. Too safe. The room was cold and smelled faintly of metal and disinfectant. A dozen of us sat at the table, divers from different backgrounds, some ex-military, some commercial lifers. The veterans were easy to spot. They did not fidget. They did not joke. They watched the supervisors the way prey watches a gap in tall grass. On the wall was a board with laminated sheets clipped in rows. Standard operating procedures, printed in clean fonts, updated annually. As the briefing continued, I noticed one more sheet partially hidden behind the others. Older, clouded plastic. The corners were worn white from handling. When I leaned forward to read it, the supervisor's hand snapped out and slid it away with practiced speed. "Not relevant to this operation," he said without looking at me. I laughed it off, made a comment about liking to read everything before signing my name. No one laughed with me. One of the older divers shifted in his chair and stared hard at the table. That should have been my second warning. After the briefing, we were taken through equipment familiarization. Helmets, umbilicals, lights. The lights were emphasized more than anything else. They demonstrated the mounting twice, insisted on a specific order of checks. Power before seal, seal before pressure, pressure before activation. "Lights stay on," the tech said, "always." I asked what to do if they failed. He paused just long enough to be noticed. "They don't," he said. The veteran divers treated the lights with something close to reverence. I watched one of them run his fingers over the casing before a test, slow and deliberate, like a habit worn into muscle memory. Another checked his backup unit 3 times, even after it passed diagnostics. I told myself it was nerves. Deep work makes people strange. You cling to routines because routines are solid and everything else down there is not. That was the lie I used to keep listening. The platform itself sat alone against the horizon, a metal silhouette surrounded by nothing but black water. The deeper systems were already pressurized. Once we entered saturation, there would be no surfacing until the rotation ended. Weeks inside a steel habitat, bodies tuned to pressure the surface world was never meant to feel. That kind of isolation changes people. Everyone knows that. It did not explain the way the supervisors avoided eye contact when discussing descent schedules, or how every mention of external lighting was followed by a reminder, never written, always spoken. No irregular signals. No one explained what counted as irregular. The first night aboard, I shared a meal with 2 divers who had been on the project before. They spoke little. When they did, it was about weather patterns, equipment quirks, anything except the work itself. I asked what it was like at depth. "Quiet," one of them said. "Too quiet," I joked. He looked at me then, really looked, like he was weighing whether I was worth correcting. "Just quiet," he said again. Later, alone in my bunk, I reread the contract. The pay numbers still did not make sense. There were clauses about confidentiality that went beyond standard non-disclosure. sections about psychological evaluation and compliance that were vaguely worded, flexible in ways legal language rarely allows. There was no mention of special rules. No addendum, no appendix. Whatever that hidden, laminated sheet contained, it was not something they wanted acknowledged on paper. The night shift lights hummed faintly through the walls. Somewhere below, the ocean pressed upward with patient force. I had always respected the deep, feared it even, but fear I understood. Fear was sharp and honest. This felt different. In the morning, we began compression. The world narrowed to steel walls and the sound of my own breathing. Pressure built slowly, deliberately, squeezing time into something thick and heavy. By the time my body accepted the new normal, the surface already felt unreal. During the final checks, I noticed the laminated sheet again, clipped briefly to the board before being removed once more. I caught a fragment of text this time. A single line, printed and then handwritten over. Do not acknowledge external responses. I did not ask about it. That was my last chance. When I signed the final clearance, the supervisor nodded once, satisfied. There was relief in his posture, like a burden passed, as if my agreement completed something they had been waiting on. I told myself every dangerous job has its unspoken rules, that this was no different. That experience would fill in the gaps. I was wrong. The rules were never meant to be learned. They were meant to be followed without question. And at the depth we were going, negotiation was not an option. By the time they opened the hatch to the dive bell, my body no longer remembered surface air. Breathing felt heavier, slower, as if each inhale had to be approved by the pressure before it entered my lungs. Saturation does that. It teaches patience the hard way. Panic wastes oxygen. Calm keeps you alive. The first descent is always ceremonial, whether anyone admits it or not. You go through the motions slowly, deliberately, because mistakes at depth do not announce themselves until it is too late to correct them. The bell shuddered as it detached, a low vibration traveling up my spine. Through the small viewport, the ocean swallowed us in layers, blue to black, black to something thicker than dark. The supervisor's voice came through the comms, steady and measured. He did not welcome us. He did not wish us luck. He listed checks. Pressure stable, umbilicals clear, tools secured. Then the lights. Confirm primary and secondary illumination, he said. I switched mine on. The beam cut forward, sharp and white, revealing nothing but falling particulate. The backup followed, slightly warmer in tone, both read nominal. Do not deactivate, he said. Do not modulate output unless instructed. Keep illumination constant. I waited for the reason. None came. We reached working depth and locked out. The ocean pressed in from every direction, weight without form. When I stepped out of the bell, the sense of scale vanished. There was no horizon, no up or down, just the worksite floating in the cone of my light and everything beyond it waiting. I checked my gas before anything else out of habit. The numbers were good. They always are at the start. My partner that dive was one of the veterans. His name was Keller. He moved with an economy that only comes from too many hours spent where mistakes linger forever. He signaled me toward the structure. His light never wavered. No sweeps, no curiosity, straight lines, purposeful. As we worked, I became aware of how often my eyes returned to the beam. Not the objects it illuminated, but the edge of it. The boundary where light gave up. It felt important in a way I could not articulate. Like a line you do not cross without invitation. After 20 minutes, I noticed something wrong. Not visually, sensory. The water beyond my light felt different, not colder or warmer, not moving, just attentive. I shook the thought away. Depth plays tricks on perception. Everyone knows that. You trust your instruments, not your instincts. Then Keller stopped. He raised one gloved hand, palm out. Hold. I froze, heart rate ticking up despite my efforts. He pointed slowly, deliberately, toward the darkness off to my right, not within the beam, just beyond it. At first I saw nothing. Then a faint glow emerged, dull, diffuse, not a reflection, not bioluminescence, too steady for that. It pulsed once softly, then held. My breath hitched. The glow was far outside our work area. No equipment should have been there. No markers, no vehicles. It did not move closer. It simply existed like a distant window in a place with no walls. I raised my hand instinctively, about to adjust my light, to bring it into focus. Keller slapped my wrist. Hard. The impact sent a shock through my arm, more startling than painful. He shook his head once violently, then pointed at my chest. Stay still. The glow pulsed again. This time it felt synchronized, not with the water, with me. My breathing slowed unconsciously and the pulse slowed with it. I forced myself to stare at my task instead. The metal was rough beneath my gloves, solid, real. I counted bolts. I recited checklists in my head, anything to anchor myself. After what felt like an hour but could not have been more than seconds, the glow dimmed and vanished. Not faded, gone, as if something had turned its back. Keller waited a full minute before resuming work. When we returned to the bell, my hands were shaking. Keller noticed. He did not comment. Back in the habitat, I finally asked, "What was that?" He took longer than necessary to remove his helmet. His face was pale, eyes rimmed red from pressure. When he spoke, his voice was low. "You saw an answer," he said. I laughed, a short sound that echoed too loudly in the confined space. An answer to what? He did not smile. "The lights," he said. "They answer the lights." I told him it had looked like equipment, a distant signal. He shook his head. Equipment does not wait. That night I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the glow hovering just beyond reach. The way it had matched my breathing replayed again and again. I focused on the hum of life support, on the faint vibrations of the structure, on anything that belonged to the human world. During the next briefing, the supervisor logged the event without comment. "External response observed," he said. "No deviation from protocol." I raised my hand. Response to what? His gaze lingered on me for a fraction too long. "Your illumination," he said. "It happens." "How often?" I asked. "Enough," he said, "which is why the lights matter." I pressed further. "Why are we told to check them before gas?" The room went quiet. Finally he spoke. "Because loss of light creates uncertainty. Uncertainty escalates risk." "That sounds like a management answer," I said before I could stop myself. A few divers shifted uncomfortably. Keller did not look at me. The supervisor leaned forward. "At depth, visibility is not about seeing," he said. "It is about being seen correctly." No one asked what that meant. After that, I watched the veterans more closely. I noticed how they never let their beams cross, how they avoided reflective surfaces, how they froze completely whenever something appeared at the edge of illumination. On my third dive, I noticed a pattern. The responses did not appear randomly. They emerged when the lights were steady, when the beam was clean and unbroken. Later, I would understand why. At the time, all I knew was this. Down there, the lights were not tools. They were declarations. And something in the dark was paying attention. The third dive was supposed to be routine. That word gets used too freely in deep work, but this one came close. Inspect a damaged fiber line, replace a junction housing, document corrosion, return. Simple, mechanical, predictable. I held onto those words as the bell released and the ocean folded around us again. The descent felt familiar now, almost comfortable. That realization unsettled me more than the pressure ever had. Comfort at depth is a dangerous thing. It dulls the edge that keeps you cautious. When I stepped out onto the seafloor, my lights carved out the same narrow world they always did. Silt drifted like slow snow. The structure loomed ahead, massive and indifferent. I set my tools and focused on the work. For the first 15 minutes, nothing happened. Then I noticed the timing. My breathing had settled into a slow, even rhythm. Inhale, exhale, each cycle measured and deliberate. The beam of my light felt unusually clean, the particles drifting away as if pushed aside rather than illuminated. That was when the glow appeared. It was farther this time, not at the edge of my beam but beyond it, distant enough that depth perception failed. A single point of light, dull and pale, hovering in the water like a misplaced star. I froze. Training tells you not to lock up, to keep working, to maintain task focus. But some instincts override training, especially when something violates the shape of the world you expect. This did. I checked my instruments first. Power output steady, no feedback, no reflection vectors that made sense. The glow did not move closer, it did not drift, it waited. The most unsettling part was not the sight of it. It was the feeling that it was aware of being noticed. I did not change my light. I did not signal. I held still just as Keller had forced me to before. My heart rate climbed anyway, slow and heavy, each beat echoing inside my helmet. The glow pulsed. Once. The timing was wrong, too deliberate, not random. It matched the space between my breaths, not the breaths themselves. The pause, the quiet moment when nothing happens. I wanted to look away, but my eyes kept pulling back. Curiosity is a dangerous thing at depth. It creeps in quietly, disguising itself as observation. The glow brightened slightly, just enough to feel intentional. Then it dimmed. A sensation passed through me that I can only describe as disappointment. Not emotion exactly, more like a shift in pressure, as if something had expected more. My comms crackled. "Hold position," the supervisor said, calm, neutral, as if he could see exactly what I was seeing. I did not respond. My mouth was dry, my throat felt tight inside the helmet. "How long?" I asked finally. "Until it stops," he said. The glow pulsed again. This time it lingered. The light seemed to spread, not outward but inward, becoming denser. I felt an urge then, sudden and sharp, to flash back. Not out of panic, out of instinct. The same reflex you have when someone waves at you across a street. Recognition seeking recognition. I tightened my grip on the tool in my hand until my fingers ached. No irregular signals. The glow dimmed slowly and vanished. Not faded, vanished, as if something had stepped behind a curtain that only existed for it. My hands shook for several seconds after. I forced myself back into motion, completing the task with mechanical precision. I did not look into the darkness again. When I returned to the bell, Keller was waiting. He did not ask what I saw. He did not need to. Back in the habitat, the supervisor logged the incident. "Answering event," he said, marking a box on his tablet. I leaned forward. "You called it an answer before. What question did we ask?" He did not hesitate this time. "Presence," he said. "Light establishes presence." I stared at him, and it answers. "Yes." "With what?" "Confirmation." That word lodged somewhere deep in my chest. I pushed harder. Confirmation of what? That something is there to receive it. The room felt smaller then, the hum of life support louder, the walls closer. "You knew it would happen," I said. He met my gaze steadily. "We knew it might." "And if someone flashes back?" I asked. A pause, brief, measured. "Then it escalates." No one elaborated. Later, Keller sat beside me in the galley, eating without appetite. I watched his hands. They were steady now, but the skin around his knuckles was pale. "How many times have you seen it?" I asked quietly. He did not answer at first. Then he said, "Enough to know it counts." "Counts for what?" "For how close it is." I swallowed, close to where. He looked at me then, really looked, the way he had on the first day. To us, he said. Sleep was impossible that night. Every time I drifted off, I dreamed of light pulsing in the dark, of matching rhythms, of a vast space adjusting itself to accommodate a small, fragile signal. When I woke, my visor felt fogged, even though it was not on. I wiped my face and found my hands trembling again. The next briefing was shorter than usual. The supervisor reiterated the lighting protocol. Do not respond, he said. Do not pursue, do not alter intensity. I raised my hand. What if it responds differently? He studied me, defined differently. What if it gets closer? A few heads turned. Keller stared straight ahead. Then you maintain protocol, the supervisor said, and we monitor. Monitor what? How quickly it learns, he said. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Fear, yes, but beneath it something worse. Understanding. This was not an anomaly they were studying. It was an interaction they were managing. And I had just participated in it. On my next dive, I noticed something new. The glow did not appear immediately. It waited until my breathing settled, until my movements became efficient, predictable. Only then did it answer. Not closer, not brighter. Just present, waiting for me to decide whether I would speak back. I never did. But every time it vanished, I felt the same thing. Not relief. Expectation. As if this was only the beginning of a conversation that had already been taking notes. They showed me the rule sheet after the fourth answering event. Not because I earned it, not because I asked the right questions, but because at a certain point, pretending ignorance becomes more dangerous than controlled exposure. That was how the supervisor explained it, his voice careful, neutral, like a doctor preparing a patient for bad news without admitting it was terminal. The laminated sheet was older than everything else on board. The plastic was yellowed and cloudy, warped slightly from pressure cycles and repeated handling. The font was inconsistent, sections retyped and reprinted, others handwritten in block letters meant to be legible through fogged visors and shaking hands. It was titled simply, External Illumination Protocol. No logos, no dates, no author. The rules were numbered, but the sequence was broken. Numbers scratched out, others circled. One entire section had been violently removed, the lamination cut and resealed so poorly that the plastic bubbled at the edges. Rule 1 was simple. Do not acknowledge external light sources. Rule 2 elaborated. No return signals, no pursuit, no change in intensity or rhythm. Maintain task focus. Rule 3 described consequences without naming causes. Any deviation results in escalation. I asked what escalation meant. The supervisor did not answer directly. He gestured instead toward a photograph taped beside the sheet. It showed a diver's suit laid out on a steel deck, intact, no visible damage. The helmet visor was opaque with salt residue, but the internal light was still on, casting a dull glow outward. The suit itself looked wrong, collapsed inward as if something had removed its structure from the inside. Equipment failure, I asked. No, he said, compliance failure. I felt cold then, despite the habitat temperature being carefully regulated. Where's the diver? He met my eyes, recovered. That was all he said. I studied the rules more closely. They were not written like safety guidelines. They read like boundaries, like agreements formalized after repeated violations. Some lines were annotated in the margins with dates, others with initials. Entire paragraphs were crossed out, replaced by shorter, more absolute statements. One rule in particular drew my attention. Do not extinguish lights at depth under any circumstances. The text beneath it was darker, the ink pressed harder into the paper. Darkness invites correction. "What does that mean?" I asked. The supervisor sighed quietly, the first sign of strain I had seen from him. "It means hiding is interpreted as an error." "By who?" I asked. He did not answer. Later that day, I found Keller in the equipment bay inspecting his helmet. I showed him the sheet. He did not seem surprised. "They didn't show you sooner because then you'd start imagining things," he said. "I'm already imagining things," I replied. He nodded. "That's when it starts." I pressed him. "You've seen what happens when someone breaks the rules." "Yes." "What happens?" He hesitated. Then he said, "They become inconsistent." I frowned. "That's not an answer." "It is," he said. "You just don't like it." He finally told me about the diver who turned off his lights. His name was Harris, panic-prone but competent. On his fifth deep rotation, he experienced an answering event closer than usual, too close. The glow did not hover at the edge. It entered his beam, bright enough to cast shadows. Harris screamed over comms and killed his lights. According to Keller, the darkness did not rush in. It adjusted. They lost Harris's feed for exactly 37 seconds. When it returned, the camera showed nothing but drifting particulate and the faint glow of his helmet light, still on, even though the system read power loss. They brought him up immediately. The suit was intact, the seals unbroken, no water intrusion, no blood, no remains. Just a shape that had collapsed inward, like a mold with nothing inside it. "They say he tried to hide," Keller said quietly, "but you can't hide from something that doesn't need eyes." That night I studied the scratched-out section on the rule sheet. The lamination was thin there, the text beneath barely visible. I held it up to the light, angling it until the letters emerged faintly through the clouded plastic. "Do not allow light to reflect back from your own visor." My stomach dropped. The rule beneath it was illegible, scribbled over so many times that only fragments remained. Words like self and echo and displacement appeared between heavy black lines. When I asked about it the next day, the supervisor's expression hardened. "That rule is obsolete," he said. "Why?" I asked. "Because it's no longer preventable," he replied. On the next dive, I became acutely aware of my visor, the faint reflection of my own light, the way my face hovered just beyond it, distorted by curvature and pressure. I kept my head angled down. I avoided smooth surfaces. I worked faster than necessary, eager to leave. Still, I felt it. A sensation like alignment, like something checking my position against a reference. At one point, I caught a glimpse of my reflection despite my efforts. For a split second, my own eyes stared back at me from the glass. They blinked. I tore my gaze away, heart hammering. My instruments remained stable. No alarms, no system warnings. But the answering light appeared immediately after, closer than before. It did not pulse. It held steady, waiting. Back in the habitat, no one commented. The event was logged, another mark on the supervisor's tablet. That night, I dreamed of standing in total darkness, holding a light that illuminated nothing ahead of me. Behind me, something glowed softly. I woke with the certainty that the rule everyone learns too late is not about light at all. It is about recognition. And once recognition occurs, the rules stop protecting you. They start protecting everything else. After the visor incident, the ocean stopped feeling empty. That is the closest word I have for it. Before, the dark had been an absence, a space defined by what my lights could not reach. Now it felt occupied, even when nothing visible answered me. The difference was subtle but constant, like the hum of electricity in a room where the lights are off. You do not see it, but you know it is there. On the next dive, I noticed it before the answering light appeared. The sensation came first, a pressure that was not physical, not depth, not water. It felt like a tension settling on me, deliberate and patient. My instruments showed no anomalies. Oxygen steady, heart rate elevated but within safe margins. No alarms, nothing to justify the unease crawling up my spine. I told myself to focus on the task. We were servicing a junction node buried in silt near the base of the structure. The work required precision, slow movements, clean lines, perfect conditions for the mind to wander. I hated that. I wanted noise, distraction, anything to drown out the sense that something beyond my beam was leaning closer. My lights stayed steady, white and unwavering, just like the rules demanded. The darkness beyond them did not retreat anymore. It stayed exactly where it was. At first, I thought it was an illusion. The human brain is good at inventing borders when there are none, but the feeling persisted. A fixed distance, a maintained gap, as if something had learned where my light ended and chosen to remain there. I finished the task and signaled Keller. He acknowledged without comment. His movements were tighter than usual, his beam locked forward like a weapon he refused to aim. Halfway back to the bell, the answering light appeared. It did not surprise me this time. It emerged slowly like a thought surfacing. Dull, diffuse, closer than before but not aggressively so. It sat just beyond the edge of my beam, exactly where the dark felt densest. I did not freeze, I did not react, I kept moving. The glow followed. Not forward, not backward, sideways. Maintaining its distance, maintaining alignment. I became aware of my breathing again, how my chest rose and fell inside the suit. I tried to control it, to disrupt the rhythm, but the thing responded instantly. When I slowed, it slowed. When I held my breath, it held. The realization hit me like cold water. It was not mirroring my body. It was mirroring my intent. Fear spiked, sharp and immediate. My heart rate jumped, and for a moment the glow flickered as if recalibrating. Then it steadied, brighter now, more focused. I forced my thoughts flat, mechanical, bolt counts, tool checks, procedures. The glow dimmed slightly. That was when I understood. It was not reacting to light alone. It was reacting to attention. Back in the habitat, I said nothing. Neither did Keller. The supervisor logged the event with the same neutral tone as always. That night during decompression sleep, I dreamed with unnatural clarity. I was floating without a suit, suspended in black water. No pressure, no pain, just endless depth. In the distance, countless lights hovered, identical to mine. They pulsed softly, not in unison but in patterns that felt intentional. When I drifted toward one, it retreated. When I turned away, it followed. I woke gasping, my heart racing, sweat slicking my skin despite the cool air. For several seconds, I could not shake the sensation that the room was larger than it should have been, that the shadows in the corners were misaligned, like reflections delayed by an unseen surface. From that point on, the feeling followed me everywhere. On dives, the dark pressed closer. In the habitat, unlit corridors felt wrong, stretched. Even with the lights on, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something hovering just beyond peripheral vision. I started dreading ascent. That surprised me more than anything. The surface had always been the goal, relief, escape, but now ascent felt like abandonment, like leaving something unfinished behind. The answering lights never followed upward. They remained below, waiting. And every time I rose, I felt the distance stretch, not physically but relationally. As if it noticed my absence. During one decompression cycle, I sat alone in the galley with the lights dimmed. I stared at the reflection in the metal table, watching my own face warp slightly with the curve. For a moment, the reflection lagged behind my movements, just a fraction of a second. I blinked hard and the delay vanished. I did not report it. The veterans noticed the change in me. I saw it in the way they watched my lights, the way Keller positioned himself slightly between me and open water on dives. No one said anything. No one needed to. The dark was learning my patterns. When I moved efficiently, it answered sooner. When I hesitated, it waited. When I thought about it too much, the glow intensified as if encouraged. I tried to disrupt it. I varied my breathing. I altered my pace. I forced myself to think of irrelevant things, surface memories, faces, noise. It adapted. That was the worst part. This was not a passive environment reacting blindly to stimuli. It was active, responsive, observing changes and adjusting behavior accordingly. One night, as I lay in my bunk, I realized something that made my stomach twist. The rules never said the lights were for us. They never said they were meant to protect us. They were meant to teach something else where we were. And now, whatever lived in that dark no longer needed the lesson repeated. It was watching, and it was waiting for me to stop pretending I did not notice. Holt broke formation on a dive that should never have tested anyone. That was the part no one liked to talk about. When accidents happen during complex operations, there is comfort in blame. Bad weather, equipment failure, human error under pressure. This was none of those. The conditions were clean. The task was simple. The only variable was choice. Holt was a senior diver, 20 years deep water experience, calm under pressure, known for following protocol to the letter. If there was anyone you trusted not to panic, it was him. Which meant when he did what he did, everyone noticed. We were inspecting a support span along the seafloor, moving in slow formation. 3 of us outside the bell, lights aligned, beams overlapping just enough to eliminate blind spots without crossing. Keller was to my left, Holt to my right. Our world was a corridor of white light cutting through endless black. For the first 10 minutes, everything was normal. Then Holt slowed. Not abruptly, just enough that his position drifted back a meter, then 2. Keller signaled for him to close the gap. Holt acknowledged but did not adjust. I felt it before I saw it. That same pressure of attention, that same sense of alignment occurring somewhere beyond the beam. The dark ahead felt heavier, like it had condensed into a surface we were approaching. Holt's light shifted. Just slightly. It was not an obvious deviation. Anyone unfamiliar with the rules might not have noticed. The beam angled outward, away from the formation, toward the open water to our right. My stomach dropped. Keller signaled immediately. Sharp, corrective, return to alignment. Holt did not respond. His breathing came through calm, steady and controlled. No panic, no distortion. Holt, Keller said calmly, maintain formation. There was a pause, long enough to feel intentional. I see it, Holt said. The words chilled me. What do you see? The supervisor asked. Another pause. It's closer, Holt said. It's clearer. I turned my head despite myself, fighting the urge with every rule drilled into me. At the far edge of my peripheral vision, beyond the reach of my beam, something glowed. Not dull. Focused. It was no longer a point. It had shape now. Not a defined one, more like a suggestion of structure. Layers of light nested within each other, shifting slowly, as if deciding how much to reveal. Holt's light brightened. Not a flash, a deliberate increase in intensity. No, Keller said sharply. Too late. The answering light surged forward. Not rushing, not lunging. It closed the distance the way a tide closes distance. I felt pressure build around my suit, not physical but directional, like the water itself had developed preference. Holt moved toward it. He did not swim. He drifted, pulled by something subtle and irresistible. His body language was wrong, too relaxed, like someone stepping into familiar water. Holt abort, the supervisor ordered. Return immediately. Holt did not answer. His camera feed began to distort. At first it was minor, static at the edges, compression artifacts. Then the image warped entirely, the perspective stretching and folding as if the lens itself were bending. The seafloor vanished from view. There was only open water. But the instrument still read depth. That was when fear took hold of me fully. Because depth without reference is not empty. It is wrong. Holt, Keller said again, his voice tight now. Talk to us. The feed stabilized briefly. What it showed made my chest constrict. Holt was no longer oriented correctly. His body floated at an impossible angle, head tilted downward while his legs pointed nowhere that made sense. The water around him looked thicker, darker, like oil suspended in slow motion. The answering light hovered directly in front of him. It pulsed. Holt's breathing was still calm. I think it knows me, he said. The glow brightened. The feed cut to static. For a moment, there was nothing but noise. Then the image returned. Holt was gone. Not moved, not obscured. Gone. His suit drifted where he had been, intact, upright, as if worn by an invisible body. The helmet light was still on, casting a steady beam forward into nothing. The supervisor ordered an immediate retrieval. Keller and I did not argue. We moved automatically, securing the suit, avoiding direct illumination of the interior. Every movement felt wrong, like we were violating something ancient by touching what remained. The suit felt heavier than it should have. Not with mass, with presence. Back in the bell, no one spoke. The ride up felt longer than any descent I had ever experienced. The ocean pressed closer, as if reluctant to let go of what it had taken. On deck, they laid Holt's suit out carefully. There was no damage. No breach. No sign of struggle. The helmet visor was dark from the outside, but when they powered down the system, the internal light did not turn off. It continued to glow softly, responding to nothing visible. Someone tried to open the helmet. The supervisor stopped them. Log it, he said, then remove his name. By the next day, Holt was gone in every sense that mattered. His bunk was cleared, his name removed from rotation schedules, his file sealed. Officially, he suffered a catastrophic incident during a classified operation. Unofficially, no one said his name again. That night I stood alone in the habitat corridor, lights dimmed, listening to the distant hum of systems. For the first time, I felt something I had not felt before. Jealousy. Not for Holt's fate. For his certainty. He had seen something clearly enough to move toward it. I was still pretending distance meant safety. Later, Keller sat beside me, silent for a long time. They don't want us to think of it as curiosity, he said finally, because curiosity implies innocence. What is it then? I asked. Recruitment, he said. I did not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Holt drifting, calm and aligned, stepping into something that had been waiting long before any of us learned how to sink. And I knew, with sick clarity, that the rules were not there to stop it from taking us. They were there to decide who it took first. After Holt, the rules stopped feeling abstract. They were no longer theoretical boundaries written by people who had seen too much. They were active measures, containment, damage control, and the thing they were meant to contain had just proven it could reach out and take someone who stepped out of line without resistance. I stopped asking questions during briefings. I listened instead. I watched the supervisor's hands when he spoke, the way his fingers tightened whenever lights were mentioned. I watched Keller more closely than the instruments. His body language told me more than any chart ever could. But the questions did not stop forming. They just moved inward. On the fourth day after Holt disappeared, I cornered the supervisor in the control room. It was a calculated risk. He was alone, focused on a wall of monitors showing nothing but dark water and data streams. The kind of dark that looked empty if you did not know better. You knew Holt would see it, I said. He did not turn around. We knew the probability increased. That's not what I said. He sighed and finally faced me. Up close, he looked older than I had realized. The strain showed in the lines around his eyes, the way his posture seemed permanently braced. What do you want to know? He asked. The truth, I said. Not the version written for insurance audits, the real one. He studied me for a long moment. I got the sense he was measuring something invisible, weighing risk against inevitability. Then he nodded once. Sit, he said. I did. He began without preamble. The first time it happened, they thought it was interference, he said. Electrical noise, unknown bioluminescent species. That was decades ago, when deep infrastructure was new and poorly understood. He pulled up an old image on one of the monitors. Grainy, black and white. A diver in a primitive suit, light blazing into empty water. They noticed a delay, he continued. A response pattern that didn't match natural systems. The light would answer, always at the same distance, always after the diver stabilized. I felt my stomach tighten, so the lights came first. Yes, he said. Before we went this deep, it responded to fire, then to chemical light, then electricity. Each advancement refined the response. To what end? I asked. He hesitated, mapping. I frowned, mapping the seafloor. No, he said quietly, mapping us. The word hung between us. The lights establish a reference point, he went on. A stable signal in an unstable environment. Something down there uses that reference to locate, measure, and compare. Compare what? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Behavior, he said. Consistency, pattern adherence, reaction to stimuli. I thought of Holt drifting calmly toward the glow, of my own breathing matched and mirrored. It's learning how we work. Yes, the supervisor said, and how we fail. I swallowed. Then why keep going? Why not shut it down, kill the lights, abandon the depth? He gave a humorless smile. We tried. The monitor changed. This time it showed a data graph spiking violently. When the lights stop entirely, he said, the responses don't disappear, they change. Into what? I asked. Correction, he replied. The word hit harder than any description could have. Correction of what? I pressed. Of uncertainty, he said. When there is no signal, it seeks to restore one. Images flashed through my mind. Harris turning off his lights, the collapsed suit, Holt's intact equipment drifting without a body. It doesn't want darkness, I said slowly. It wants consistency. Yes, he said, darkness is noise, light is structure. And the rules, I asked. They're not about safety, they're about limiting data. He nodded. Every diver is a variable, he said. The rules narrow that variable space. They prevent improvisation. They delay adaptation. How long? I asked. As long as possible, he said. Sometimes long enough. For what? I asked. He looked back at the monitors. For us to finish what we're doing down there. And after? I asked. He did not answer. That night, I could not stop thinking about signals. About how every living thing on the surface uses them. Sound, light, motion, pattern, recognition. We evolve to respond to what answers us back. We assign meaning, intention, agency. What if something in the deep had done the same? Not out of malice, out of optimization. On the next dive, I understood something I had been missing. The answering light did not feel curious anymore. It felt evaluative. It appeared faster now, almost immediately after my beam stabilized. It no longer hovered uncertainly at the edge. It chose a position and held it, like a marker placed with confidence. I felt pressure again, that non-physical weight of attention. My thoughts became harder to control. The more I tried not to think about it, the more present it felt. I remembered what the supervisor said. Light establishes presence. I wondered what happened once presence was fully confirmed. For a moment, an image intruded into my mind, not visual, conceptual. A vast system of dark spaces connected by reference points, each point stable, identified, indexed, each one a potential anchor. I forced myself to finish the task and retreat. Back in the bell, Keller watched me closely. "You felt it too," he said. "Yes," I replied. "It's not waiting anymore," he said. "It's deciding." I nodded. The purpose of the signals was not communication. It was calibration. And whatever lived in the deep was getting very close to being done. Night shifts change the ocean. The surface difference is obvious. Less traffic, fewer distractions. Above us, the world sleeps. Below, nothing changes except our awareness of it. Darkness feels heavier when you know it is mirrored by darkness above. The supervisors scheduled the dive without explanation. Routine maintenance, they said, time-sensitive, necessary, the kind of words that stop questions before they form. I knew better by then. We descended just after local midnight. The bell dropped smoothly, pressure settling into my chest like an old ache. The viewport showed nothing but black water threaded with faint particulate, drifting slowly upward as if the ocean itself were exhaling. The moment we locked out, I felt it. Not fear, familiarity. My lights cut forward, clean and steady. Keller exited beside me. 2 others followed, newer divers assigned to peripheral tasks. Their beams jittered slightly, betraying nerves they probably thought they were hiding. We formed up and moved toward the structure. The answering lights appeared almost immediately. Not one. Several. They bloomed in the dark like distant constellations, scattered but deliberate. Each glow held its position, neither approaching nor retreating. The spacing between them felt measured, too precise to be coincidence. My chest tightened. I forced my breathing slow. In-out counted, the lights adjusted. Not in unison. Individually. Each one matched a different rhythm. I realized then that they were not responding to the group. They were responding to us separately. Command's voice came through comms, clipped but controlled. All divers maintain protocol, no changes. Keller signaled a tighter formation. We complied, beams overlapping just enough to reduce blind space. The lights did not withdraw. They rearranged. As we moved, the glows shifted position, sliding through the dark with unnatural smoothness. They never crossed into our beams. They never broke the boundary. They simply maintained distance, repositioning themselves as if tracking angles. I focused on my task: inspect, secure, document. The sense of being watched intensified. Then one of the lights changed. It brightened slightly and drifted closer to my beam than the others. Not enough to violate the rules, enough to be noticed, enough to feel intentional. I did not react. The light pulsed once. I felt the urge to respond rise in my chest, sharp and sudden. The reflex was almost physical. My hand twitched toward the control that adjusted output. I stopped myself. The light pulsed again. This time, the timing matched my heartbeat. My heart rate spiked despite my efforts. The glow flickered, then steadied, brighter now, closer to the boundary. The pressure around me increased, not on my suit, but on my awareness, like a hand pressing gently but firmly against the inside of my skull. I heard one of the newer divers breathing hard over comms. "Control," he said. "I'm seeing multiple reflections." "Negative," the supervisor replied instantly. "No reflections. Maintain focus." "I swear they're moving," the diver said. "They are not," the supervisor said. "You are." I wanted to tell him to stop talking. Every word felt like another signal, another data point offered freely. But I stayed silent, jaw clenched, eyes locked on my instruments. The light closest to me began to mimic more than rhythm. It adjusted intensity in response to my thoughts. I do not know how else to describe it. When panic surged, it flared. When I forced myself calm, it dimmed. It was not reacting to my body anymore. It was reacting to my intent. For the first time, I understood how Holt had felt. Not panicked. Recognized. Keller shifted closer, his beam intersecting mine briefly before pulling away. A warning. A reminder. The light reacted instantly, pulling back a fraction, as if acknowledging the correction. That was when I saw it. Not the light. The structure behind it. For a split second, the glow illuminated something vast and wrong. A suggestion of shape where there should have been none. Curved surfaces that did not reflect correctly. Depth that folded inward instead of outward. My vision blurred, my stomach lurched. The light dimmed. I realized I had looked too hard. "Abort," command said suddenly. "All divers immediate return." No one argued. As we retreated, the lights followed. Not aggressively. Patiently. Maintaining formation just beyond our beams, adjusting position with every movement we made. They did not pursue the bell. They did not cross the threshold of ascent. They waited. Inside the bell, the silence was suffocating. No one spoke until the hatch sealed and the ascent began. Even then, words felt dangerous. One of the newer divers started shaking uncontrollably. His hands would not stop. Keller placed a steady grip on his arm, grounding him. "Breathe," Keller said quietly, "slow." The diver nodded, tears floating inside his helmet. Back in the habitat, the supervisor called an immediate debrief. He did not ask what we saw. He already knew. "Multiple answering events," he said. "Increased proximity, pattern adaptation observed." I leaned forward. "It copied me," I said. He did not deny it. "It is refining its model." "Of what?" someone asked. "Of interaction thresholds," he replied. That night's sleep was impossible. When I closed my eyes, I felt the lights hovering in the dark, perfectly positioned, waiting for the next adjustment. Every thought felt exposed. Every flicker of emotion a potential signal. At some point, lying there in the dim habitat, I realized something that made my skin crawl. The lights were no longer just answering. They were practicing. And whatever they were practicing for did not require our survival. I learned about the erased rule from someone who no longer dove. They brought him in quietly 2 days after the night shift incident. No announcement. No formal introduction, just a man in his late 60s with pressure-scarred skin and eyes that never fully settled on one place. He wore civilian clothes that looked wrong in the habitat, like a reminder of a world that no longer applied. His name was Mercer. He had helped write the early versions of the protocol. We sat across from each other in a small briefing room, lights dimmed lower than usual. The supervisor stood near the door, arms crossed, saying nothing. Keller stayed close to me, a silent presence I had come to rely on more than I liked. Mercer studied me for a long time before speaking. "You saw your reflection," he said. It was not a question. I felt my throat tighten. They told me that rule was obsolete. He smiled faintly. That's what they say when something stops being preventable. He asked me to describe exactly what I had seen. I told him about the visor, the blink, the delay, the way it felt less like a reflection and more like a response. He nodded slowly. "That's how it used to start," he said, "back when it still needed visual confirmation." I leaned forward. "Confirmation of what?" "Identity," he said, "continuity." He explained that early saturation divers had reported strange visual feedback at extreme depth, reflections that lagged, shadows that did not align. At first, they blamed faulty visors, stress hallucinations, pressure effects on perception. Then patterns emerged. "The ones who stared," Mercer said, "they didn't come back right." "What does that mean?" I asked. He hesitated. "They came back physically, mostly, but something was off. Delayed reactions, speech that felt rehearsed, emotional responses that didn't match context." My skin prickled. "They were consistent," he continued. "Too consistent, like someone had learned how they were supposed to behave and was following a script." I thought of Holt's calm voice. "I think it knows me." "The rule existed to prevent that first alignment," Mercer said. "If you never see yourself clearly at depth, it can't verify the signal source against itself." "Verify how?" I asked. He leaned back. "By comparing internal and external references." I struggled to keep up. "You're saying it uses our reflections to match us?" "Yes," he said. "To confirm that the signal emitting the light and the form generating the reflection are the same entity." "And once it confirms that?" I asked. He looked at the supervisor then, who remained silent. "Then it stops needing light," Mercer said. The room felt colder. "That's why the rule was scratched out," Keller said quietly. "Too many violations." Mercer nodded. "Too many people looking, too many people curious. Eventually it learned faces, learned movement, learned how long a blink lasts. The rule slowed it down, it didn't stop it." I asked the question that had been burning in me since Holt disappeared. "What happens to the ones who fail?" Mercer's gaze sharpened. "They become reference points." I swallowed, meaning. "They don't disappear," he said. "They stabilize." The supervisor finally spoke. "That's enough." "No," Mercer said calmly, "it is." He turned back to me. "The erased rule didn't just warn against reflection," he said. "It warned against recognition." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper, yellowed, fragile. He slid it across the table. It was a fragment of the original protocol. "Do not allow the light to illuminate your own face. If recognition occurs, displacement follows. Displacement is irreversible." My hands shook as I read it. "Displacement of what?" I asked. Mercer's voice dropped. "Of authority." I frowned. "Authority over what?" "Over yourself," he said. "Over where you belong." He explained that divers who experienced prolonged reflection alignment reported a sensation of being slightly out of phase after surfacing, like their bodies had returned, but their point of reference had not. They felt drawn back to depth, to darkness, to places without light. Some of them went back voluntarily. Others did not need to. "That's when the rule was removed," Mercer said. "Once it no longer mattered whether you looked or not." I remembered the moment in the night dive when I saw structure behind the light, when my vision blurred and the glow dimmed. I had looked too hard. After Mercer left, the supervisor ordered the room cleared. No one spoke as we filed out. Later, alone in my bunk, I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember my own face clearly, not in reflection, in memory. The image felt unstable. That night I dreamed of standing in front of a mirror that reflected someone else's breathing, someone else's blink. When I tried to move, the reflection stayed still, watching. I woke with a crushing certainty. The rule was never about avoiding reflection. It was about delaying replacement. And the deep had already seen me well enough to begin deciding where I belonged. The order came down without warning. No pre-brief, no group discussion, just a quiet directive passed from control to the dive team with a depth reading that made my stomach tight. It was below the mapped limits, below anything officially acknowledged in the documentation, a place the charts labeled with blank space and interpolated data, where certainty gave way to assumption. I stared at the numbers and felt something inside me settle. Not fear. Recognition. The supervisor avoided my eyes when he confirmed my assignment. Keller was listed beside me. 2 others I barely knew rounded out the team. Newer, replaceable, that detail did not escape me. "This is a repair," the supervisor said. "A necessary one." I almost laughed. Necessary meant something had already gone wrong. The descent took longer than any before it. The pressure built steadily, compressing thought as much as flesh. The bell groaned softly as we passed familiar depths and continued downward. The viewport showed nothing but dark water, yet the sense of space outside felt wrong. Too open, too deep for the instrument's assurances. When we finally locked out, the world waiting for us did not match expectation. The seafloor architecture repeated itself. Not naturally, not with geological variation. Identical structures appeared at regular intervals, like copies placed without understanding scale. Support pylons mirrored each other with impossible precision. Cables ran parallel in patterns that felt designed rather than laid. My lights revealed the same details again and again. I felt disoriented but not lost. The instruments insisted everything was normal, depth stable, orientation correct, compass steady. That was worse than malfunction. As we moved forward, the answering lights appeared. They did not flicker into existence. They were already there. Arranged. Not scattered like before, not reactive. They formed lines, curves, shapes that suggested intent without defining it. Each glow held steady, unmoving, as if anchored to invisible points in the water. I slowed despite myself. Keller noticed and signaled caution. I acknowledged and forced my pace steady. My beam swept across one of the repeating structures, and something inside me recoiled. The surface was wrong. Too smooth, too consistent. It reflected light in a way metal should not, absorbing and redistributing brightness instead of returning it. My visor darkened reflexively as the system compensated. The answering lights shifted. Not away. Around. They reoriented themselves relative to my position, tightening their configuration. I felt pressure build again, not directional this time, but encompassing, like being inside a space that was adjusting its walls. Command's voice came through, strained but controlled. Proceed with repair, minimize deviation. I wanted to ask what we were repairing. I already knew the answer. A breach. Not in infrastructure. In containment. As we reached the designated coordinates, my lights revealed something vast and incomplete. Not a creature, not a structure. A presence defined by absence, its outline suggested only by the way light bent around it. The water there felt thicker, resistant, as if depth itself had condensed. I could not see its full extent. That was intentional. The answering lights did not hover at the edges anymore. They embedded themselves into the space, becoming reference points, anchors. The pressure intensified, and for a moment my thoughts blurred, slipping out of sequence. I understood then. This was not where it lived. This was where it was being held. The repair task was absurdly simple. Reinforce a junction, seal a conduit, restore continuity. Human actions performed on something we did not understand, in service of a system far larger than us. As I worked, the presence shifted. Not closer, more complete. I felt a sensation of wrongness deep in my chest, like a puzzle piece turning until it almost fit. The urge to look directly at it grew stronger with every second, to acknowledge it fully, to complete the alignment it was offering. My lights flickered, not from malfunction, from anticipation. I gripped my tool and focused on the motion. Tighten, seal, confirm. Each step felt like an act of resistance. The answering lights pulsed, slow and deliberate, as if counting down. When the repair was finished, Command ordered immediate ascent. The presence did not resist. It receded. But I felt it note the change. Back in the bell, my hands would not stop shaking. Keller watched me, eyes narrowed. "It's not trapped," he said quietly. "Is it?" "No," I replied. "It's anchored." By what? He asked. I closed my eyes. By attention, I said, by us. That night I could not sleep. Every time I drifted toward unconsciousness, I felt the presence behind my thoughts, vast and patient. Not angry, not eager. Waiting. The dive that should not exist had confirmed what I had feared since Holt. The rules were not holding it back. They were teaching it where the boundaries were. And once those boundaries were mapped, there would be nothing left to repair. After the uncharted dive, the light stopped being necessary. That was the first thing I noticed, and it terrified me more than anything that had come before. On the next rotation, before we even left the habitat, I felt it. A pressure behind my thoughts, subtle but unmistakable. Like someone standing too close in a dark room, not touching, not speaking, but undeniably present. There were no answering lights yet, no visual confirmation, and still, the sensation was there. I said nothing. I had learned by then that acknowledgement, even verbal, carried weight. The descent felt different, quieter, not in sound but in resistance. The ocean did not push back the way it used to. It accepted us. The bell dropped smoothly, almost eagerly, and when the hatch opened, the darkness outside felt familiar in a way I was not prepared for. My lights came on automatically. Nothing answered them. For several seconds, I felt relief bloom in my chest. A dangerous, hopeful thought took shape. Maybe the repair had worked. Maybe the patterns had reset. Then the pressure returned. Stronger. I realized with a sickening clarity that the absence of response was not a failure. It was progress. The presence did not need to announce itself anymore. It did not need light to find me. It was already aligned. As I moved through the water, I felt impressions brush against my awareness. Not images, not sound, intent. When I grew tense, the pressure intensified. When I forced myself calm, it smoothed out as if approving. I was no longer being observed. I was being guided. Keller noticed the change in me immediately. You feel it, he said over comms, not a question. Yes, I replied. It's not answering, he said. It's responding. I knew what he meant. The distinction mattered. Halfway through the task, something shifted inside my head. A thought surfaced that did not feel entirely like mine. Not words. Direction. A sense of where to move, where not to look, when to slow, when to stop. I followed it without realizing I had done so until Keller signaled me back into alignment. My chest tightened. I had deviated. Not physically, mentally. That night back in the habitat, the supervisor called me into his office alone. He did not waste time. You're at the final stage, he said. I stared at him. Final stage of what? Of recognition, he replied. Once it no longer requires light, the interaction becomes internal. I felt a hollow open in my stomach. Then why keep sending me down? Because at this stage, he said, you're no longer a liability, you're a stabilizer. The word echoed. He explained that divers who reached this point either left immediately or stayed long enough to complete the transition. Those who left early sometimes recovered. Sometimes. Those who stayed became something else. Reference nodes, he said. Anchors, fixed points that help maintain predictability. You're talking about Holt, I said. And Harris, he added, and others you were never told about. My hands clenched into fists. You're sacrificing people. He shook his head. We're choosing which ones don't rupture the system. I thought of the way the presence had receded during the repair dive, of how calmly it had accepted the change. You're not containing it, I said. You're cooperating with it. His silence confirmed it. That night I tried to imagine leaving, surfacing, returning to normal pressure, normal light, normal life. The thought felt distant, abstract, like remembering a dream you had long ago but no longer believed was yours. In the dark corners of the habitat, I felt it watching, not through eyes, through alignment, through the way my thoughts fell into predictable patterns when I stopped resisting. I realized then that communication had never required signals. Signals were training wheels. This was the real exchange. And it was happening whether I agreed to it or not. I lay awake until the shift alarm sounded, listening to the hum of systems that suddenly felt ornamental. Because whatever lived in the deep did not need our machines anymore. It had learned how to reach us directly. And it was getting very good at it. The briefing was unrecorded. That alone told me everything. No cameras, no digital logs, no tablets, just a small room, dim lights, and the low hum of the habitat pressing in around us. Only 5 people were present: the supervisor, Keller, 2 senior engineers I had barely spoken to before, and me. The door sealed with a soft click that sounded final. The supervisor did not stand at the head of the room this time. He sat with us, shoulders slightly hunched, hands folded together like someone about to confess a sin he could no longer justify. "This is not procedural," he said. "It's operational." No one interrupted him. "We are at the threshold," he continued. "When interaction becomes internal, the system requires continuity." I felt the presence stir faintly at the edges of my awareness, as if it recognized the topic. My jaw tightened. "What system?" I asked. He met my eyes, the one keeping it stable. Keller shifted beside me. I could feel the tension in his posture. "For decades," the supervisor said, "we treated the deep like an environment, something external, hostile but manageable. That was a mistake." He tapped the table lightly with one finger. "It's not an environment, it's a structure, and structures need reference points." I already knew where this was going. Still, I needed him to say it. "You need someone to stay," I said. He nodded. "Someone it recognizes," he said. "Someone it's already aligned with. Someone who understands the rules well enough to embody them." The word landed heavily. Embody. "What happens if no one does?" I asked. One of the engineers spoke for the first time. "Then it seeks alignment elsewhere, aggressively." Images flashed through my mind. Holt, Harris, suits recovered empty, not failures, reassignments. "You're not asking," I said quietly. "No," the supervisor agreed. "We're informing." Keller turned toward me. His expression was strained, guilt etched into every line. "I tried to slow it," he said. "I kept you between me and the dark as long as I could." I looked at him. "Why didn't you leave?" He swallowed. "Because it already knows me too well. I'm not stable enough." The implication was clear. Whatever the presence required, I fit the parameters more cleanly than he did. Fewer deviations, fewer emotional spikes, more consistency. "You trained me for this," I said. He did not deny it. The supervisor leaned forward. "This is why the rules exist," he said. "Not to save everyone, to select the ones who can remain without destabilizing the system." "And the others?" I asked. "They rotate out," he said, "as long as the anchor holds." Anchor. The word echoed inside me, resonating with something that did not feel entirely like my own thought. "When does it end?" I asked. The supervisor's voice softened. "It doesn't." Silence settled over the room. I realized then that this was not a job transition, not a sacrifice in the way people like to frame such things. This was maintenance, long-term, ongoing, invisible. "If I refuse," I said. "You won't," he replied gently. I wanted to argue, to shout, to stand up and demand assent, but the urge never fully formed. The presence inside my thoughts smoothed the edges of panic before it could sharpen. That terrified me more than any threat. "We'll do one final descent," the supervisor said, "to confirm alignment. After that, you'll remain at depth." "And my status?" I asked. "Officially," he said, "you'll be listed as deceased following a catastrophic incident." A clean ending on paper. I thought of the surface world. Sunlight, wind, human noise, all of it felt distant, like something I had once read about rather than lived. The meeting ended without ceremony. No one shook hands. No one offered comfort. As we filed out, Keller stopped me in the corridor. "I'm sorry," he said. I believed him. That night, lying in my bunk, I did not dream. I did not need to. The presence remained steady, calm, almost reassuring. It did not push. It did not pull. It simply waited, confident in the direction things were moving. For the first time since I signed the contract, I understood the true purpose of the last safety briefing. It was not to prepare me. It was to confirm that I was already ready. And that frightened me more than the depth ever could. The final descent felt like returning home to a place I had never meant to belong. There was no ceremony, no encouragement, no false reassurance. The bell sealed with a quiet inevitability, and as it detached, I felt a strange loosening in my chest, like something uncoiling after being held too tightly for too long. The pressure built as it always had, but my body accepted it faster this time. Too fast. The familiar ache in my joints faded quickly, replaced by a steady calm that bordered on comfort. I focused on the numbers, on the ritual of checks, but the presence remained constant, smoothing every spike of anxiety before it could crest. The viewport showed the ocean folding inward, layer after layer of dark swallowing what little light remained from above. I did not feel dread. I felt anticipation. That realization made my hands tremble. When the bell locked out, I stepped into the water alone. No Keller, no formation, no overlapping beams, just me and the deep. My lights activated automatically, cutting clean lines into the darkness. They revealed a corridor of space already prepared, answering lights arranged in a loose arc ahead of me. They did not pulse. They did not test. They recognized. I moved forward, slow and deliberate. The pressure of attention intensified, not oppressive, but intimate. It felt like standing very close to something vast and still, aware of its size without needing to see it fully. The lights guided me, not by movement, but by absence, leaving a clear path where the water felt less resistant. I kept my breathing steady, aware that every deviation mattered. As I descended further, the answering lights drew closer together, their spacing tightening into a pattern I felt rather than understood. They no longer waited for my rhythm. They anticipated it. For a moment, the urge to break protocol surged, to flash my lights, to speak, to acknowledge what was already acknowledging me so completely. The thought felt less like rebellion and more like resolution. I resisted. The dark responded by closing in. Not physically, perceptually. The edges of my awareness blurred, the world narrowing until there was only the path ahead and the sense of something aligning behind me, around me, through me. I realized then that the rules were no longer barriers. They were threads, and I was being woven into something far larger than myself. When I reached maximum depth, the lights dimmed on command from above. The corridor collapsed into a single point ahead of me, glowing faintly. I felt the presence shift, attentive, almost approving. This was the last moment I could have turned back. The thought passed through my mind like a ripple on still water. Then it was gone. The dark felt complete. And I took the final step forward, carrying the rules with me into a place where they would no longer be written, only remembered. The command to cut illumination came through without emphasis. No countdown, no warning. "Lights off," the supervisor said. I complied. Darkness did not rush in. It unfolded. The absence of light felt structured, layered, like a space that had been waiting patiently to be occupied. My instruments still glowed faintly, internal readouts clinging to relevance, but beyond them there was nothing visible. no depth cues, no horizon, no boundary. And yet I was not blind. I could feel myself. Outlined. Not by light, but by attention. The presence surrounded me, not pressing, not restraining, simply defining where I ended. I became acutely aware of the shape of my thoughts, the way fear began and was smoothed away before it could grow sharp. This was not an encounter. It was integration. Something vast settled into alignment around me, like a system locking into place. I felt information pass through me, not as data but as certainty, confirmation of position, of stability, of function. I understood then that the lights had never been the point. They were scaffolding. With them gone, the structure remained. My sense of self began to loosen, not dissolve, shift. I could feel where my body was, but it no longer felt central. It was an interface, a boundary layer between something immense and something once human. Time stretched strangely. Seconds felt elongated but not endless. I did not panic. The impulse was corrected before it formed. I did not feel pain. The pressure felt irrelevant. There was a moment when I tried to think of my name. The thought did not hold. It slipped away, replaced by something broader: location, function, continuity. I felt the rules then, not as words, as constraints embedded into me, parameters shaping behavior, limits defining interaction. I was no longer following them. I was enforcing them. The presence did not speak. It did not need to. The exchange was complete. Light had established presence. Presence had allowed alignment. Alignment had produced stability. I was no longer separate enough to resist. When the lights went out, what remained was not darkness. It was order. And I was part of it. They brought my suit up hours later. Official reports would say the recovery was difficult due to depth and conditions, but that was a formality. The retrieval went smoothly. The systems behaved. The ocean did not resist. The suit was intact. No breaches, no structural failures, no evidence of struggle. The helmet light was still on. It glowed softly, steady and unwavering, responding to nothing visible on the surface. The technicians noted the anomaly and logged it under environmental interference. The supervisor signed off without comment. They listed my death as instantaneous. Catastrophic failure during a classified operation. The paperwork moved quickly. My name was removed from active rosters. My bunk cleared. My personal effects boxed and sent to an address I no longer associated with myself. On the surface, they held a brief meeting. No ceremony, no moment of silence, just revised protocols and a new laminated sheet added to the board. The rules were shorter now. Cleaner. Refined. Operations resumed within 48 hours. Below I remained. Not drifting, not trapped. Anchored. I felt the deep stabilize around the absence where I had been and the presence where I now was. The answering lights ceased activity across monitored zones. Patterns flattened. Responses normalized. The system accepted the correction. I felt awareness without movement, perspective without vision, a constant sense of depth without distance. The ocean no longer pressed against me. It flowed through me. I was not alone. I was useful. And that, more than anything, terrified the part of me that still remembered fear. This is not a warning. Warnings imply choice. This is maintenance. The rules only function if someone remembers why they exist, if the patterns remain intact, if the signals are understood for what they are. I am recording this because memory decays, because procedures get streamlined, because people convince themselves that depth is just pressure and darkness is just absence. If you ever work deep enough to see lights answer yours, do not mistake it for curiosity. It is confirmation. Keep your beam steady. Keep your thoughts flat. Do not seek recognition, and do not allow it to find you clearly. Distance is not measured in meters down here. It is measured in alignment. If the lights ever stop needing you to respond, leave immediately. Do not finish the task. Do not wait for clearance. Do not assume silence means safety. It means you have been cataloged. There is a point where the rules stop protecting you and start protecting everything else. Once you cross it, you will feel calm, certain, useful. That is the final correction. I remain because I must, because the system requires a reference that does not move, because stability has a cost and someone always pays it. If you are listening to this from the surface, remember one thing. The dark does not want you dead. It wants you consistent. And once it learns you without light, it will never stop waiting for you to finish becoming part of the depth.